If you're a couple with $600,000 in super and you own your home, you could be losing more than $14,000 a year in age pension. And Centrelink won't send you a letter explaining why. That's over $1,100 a month gone, because of a rule most Australians have never been clearly told about. If you found this video, subscribe now, because this channel is for Australians like you, people who saved hard, did the right thing, and now want to make sure the system doesn't quietly take it back. Most people think super and the age pension are two separate things. Your super is yours. You built it over 30 years. The age pension is the government's thing. They don't really interact until you start drawing down, right? Wrong. The moment you hit age pension age, which is 67, your super balance gets counted in the assets test. Whether it's sitting in accumulation or in a pension account, Centrelink sees it. And if your total assessable assets push you over a certain threshold, your pension starts getting clipped. $3 per fortnight for every $1,000 you're over. That doesn't sound like much until you do the actual numbers. The assets test sounds straightforward, but the trap is in the details, especially when one partner is younger than the other. I'll show you exactly how your super gets assessed and why the most popular fix people talk about can actually cost you more than it saves. Because there's a part of that strategy almost nobody mentions. Let's get into the actual numbers, because this is where most people are flying blind. For a couple who own their home, the full age pension starts cutting out once your total assessable assets exceed $470,000. That's the threshold as of March 2026. And for every $1,000 above that, your pension drops by $3 per fortnight. So if you and your partner have $650,000 in assessable assets, you're $180,000 over the threshold. That's a reduction of $540 per fortnight, or more than $14,000 a year. That's not a rounding error. That's a real income hit, and it comes out of money you earned and saved. Now here's what catches people off guard. Most couples hit that threshold not because they're wealthy, but because they have a decent super balance and maybe some shares or savings on top. You don't need a beach house portfolio for the assets test to bite. A $500,000 super balance plus $100,000 in bank accounts, and a car puts a homeowner couple well over the threshold. The part pension doesn't cut out entirely until assessable assets reach $1,045,500 for a couple. So there's still some pension available at higher balances, but the taper eats into it fast, and most people don't realize how fast. Here's something that trips people up. Super is not always assessable. If your partner is younger than 67, the age pension age, and their super is still in the accumulation phase, that money is not counted in Centrelink's assets test. Not until they reach 67 themselves. That sounds like an opportunity, and it is. But there's a catch, and we'll get to it in a moment. What does get counted once you're both 67? Everything. Super in pension phase, super in accumulation phase, bank accounts, shares, managed funds, investment properties, vehicles at second-hand value, and even household contents above a certain estimate. The exemptions are narrower than people expect. The income test runs alongside the assets test. Centrelink uses a system called deeming to calculate notional income from your financial assets, including super in pension phase. The lower deeming rate is 1.25% on the first $106,200 of financial assets for a couple, and 3.25% on everything above that. So even if your investments are sitting in cash earning nothing, Centrelink assumes you're earning the deemed rate. Whichever test, income or assets, produces the lower pension is the one that applies. For homeowners with moderate super balances, it's usually the assets test. According to MoneySmart, which is i6 consumer guidance site, many Australians in retirement use a combination of super and the age pension. That mix shifts over time as the super balance draws down. Understanding how your super is assessed is the starting point for making that mix work in your favour, rather than against you. The most common mistake I see: people assume their super balance doesn't really start affecting the pension until they're close to running it down. They think their balance is just sitting there, it's not income, why would it matter? But the assets test doesn't care whether you're drawing from it or not. The balance counts. So you're probably thinking, if my younger spouse's super is in accumulation and it's not counted, why not move it back to accumulation? Buy back some age pension now while she's still under 67. That's exactly the strategy everyone talks about. And it might be right for you, but it carries a cost that almost nobody factors in. And that cost can quietly undo the pension gain entirely. Let me show you what that strategy looks like in real life and where it quietly falls apart. Take Mark and Sue. Mark is 67, recently retired, and has $400,000 in an account-based pension. Sue is 63 and still working part-time. She has $200,000 in super, still in accumulation phase. Together, their assessable assets sit at around $600,000. That's $130,000 over the couple homeowner threshold. So their age pension is reduced by $390 per fortnight, or about $10,100 a year. The standard advice you'll hear is, move Sue's $200,000 back to accumulation. Because Sue is under 67, her accumulation balance won't be counted by Centrelink. Do that, and their assessable assets drop from $600,000 to $400,000, which is under the full pension threshold. The gain? Potentially $390 per fortnight, or about $10,100 a year restored. That's real money. I'm not dismissing it. But here's the part that doesn't make it into most conversations. Money in accumulation phase is less accessible than money in a pension account. You can't just make a phone call and have $50,000 in your bank account tomorrow. Sue would need to meet a condition of release, like retiring or turning 65, before she can take a lump sum freely. And if she needs that money urgently for something real, a new roof, emergency surgery, a leaking hot water system, helping a kid who just lost their job, she may have to sell investment assets at short notice. That can mean selling during a bad market, triggering capital gains tax, or both. I used to think this strategy was a no-brainer. I'd tell people, move the younger spouse's super to accumulation, boost your pension, easy win. Then I watched a client face exactly this situation. Hot water system gone, roof leaking, and the money was locked in accumulation. To get $50,000 out, they had to sell assets during a rough patch in the market. The costs, between the timing and the tax, easily wiped out several months of pension gains. That was the moment I realized liquidity has a real price, and you have to factor it in before making the move. Here's how to think about it properly. Before you consider moving super back to accumulation, ask yourself 3 questions. 1. How likely is it that I'll need a lump sum in the next 5 years? 2. What's the actual after-tax cost of pulling that money out of accumulation versus having it in pension phase, where it's more accessible? 3. Does the pension gain I'm expecting actually exceed that cost over the same time period? If the honest answer to question 1 is probably not. Maybe you've got good savings elsewhere and your home is in solid shape. Then the strategy might stack up. But if you're carrying an aging house, you've got grown kids who may need help, or your health isn't as predictable as it was, then locking $200,000 into accumulation carries real risk. The pension gain is certain. The liquidity cost is uncertain. And uncertain costs have a way of arriving at the worst possible time. There's a particular frustration that comes up constantly when I talk with people about this. You spent 30 years making super contributions. You didn't touch it when times were tight. You chose the work over the holiday. And then you turn 67 and find out that because you saved, your pension is lower than someone who didn't. It feels like a punishment, and honestly, it kind of is. That feeling has a name in behavioral research. It's called loss aversion. The psychological pain of losing something you've already built is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something new. When you see your pension statement and realize $540 a fortnight is being shaved off because you were responsible, that's not irrational. That's a completely normal human response. I'm not going to tell you the system is fair. It isn't, in the way you're feeling it. But here's where people sometimes get tripped up. They let that anger drive the decision making. They either give up and don't claim what they're entitled to, or they chase strategies to beat the system without properly modeling what those strategies actually cost them. Take Yan. She's single, owns her home, and has $400,000 in super. She came across advice on a forum aimed at couples, the standard move it back to accumulation discussion, and tried to apply it to her situation. But the thresholds for single homeowners are different. Her full pension threshold is only $314,000. So with $400,000 in assessable assets, she's $86,000 over. That's a pension reduction of $258 per fortnight, or about $6,700 a year. She didn't know the single thresholds were that much lower than the couple ones, and the advice she was reading didn't flag it. That's the system failing her, not her failing the system. The good news, and there is good news, is that understanding the rules changes your options entirely. The frustration is valid, but once you know exactly where you stand against the thresholds, you move from reacting to planning. You find out how far over you are, whether it's worth trying to reduce assessable assets, and what that actually costs in real terms. The people who end up better off aren't the ones who are angrier about the system. They're the ones who sit down, run their own numbers, and figure out which moves actually pay off for their specific situation. Not the couple situation they read about online. Their situation. So let's talk about what those moves actually look like. There are 4 things you can do with this information, and you can start on the first one this week without talking to anyone. Step 1. Build your asset list and compare it to the thresholds. Get a piece of paper or a spreadsheet and list everything that Centrelink counts. Super balances for both of you, in whatever phase they're in at your current ages. Bank accounts, shares and managed funds, any investment properties, vehicles at what you'd realistically get for them second-hand, not what they cost new. An estimate for household contents. Add it all up. Then compare to the thresholds that apply to you right now. If you're a couple who owns your home, full pension up to $470,000 part pension, available up to $1,045,500. If you're a single homeowner, full pension up to $314,000 part pension, available up to $695,500. These figures are as of March 2026. They're indexed and updated periodically, so check the Services Australia website for the current numbers when you're doing this exercise. Once you know where you sit relative to the threshold, you know whether you have a problem worth solving. Some people do this exercise and find they're actually under the threshold. They qualify for the full pension and didn't realize it. Others find they're well over and want to understand what they can do about it. Step 2. If you have a younger spouse, model the liquidity trade-off before you move anything. Use the 3-question framework from earlier. What's the probability you'll need a lump sum in the next 5 years? What's the real after-tax cost of getting it out of accumulation if you need it? Does the pension gain cover that cost over the same period? If you decide the strategy makes sense, keep a cash buffer in an accessible savings account, enough to cover a realistic emergency without having to touch the super. Step 3. Look at the exempt assets that are available to you. Your home is exempt from the assets test. Improvements you make to it are too. If you're planning to renovate, repaint, or fix things that have been on the list for years. Doing it now can reduce your assessable assets while also improving something you live in. That's a genuine double benefit. Funeral bonds are another one. A prepaid funeral bond, up to around $15,000 per person, is an exempt asset under the assets test. It's not an exciting thing to think about, but for someone sitting just above the threshold, it can make a real difference. Gifting is allowed within limits, up to $10,000 per financial year, and no more than $30,000 over any 5-year period. Any amount you gift above those limits gets treated as a deprived asset. Centrelink still counts it for 5 years. So gifting works, but only within the rules. If you have adult children who need help, the timing matters. Step 4. If you're single, be careful about which advice you follow. A lot of the strategies discussed online, and in videos like this, are primarily designed around couples. The accumulation strategy works differently when you're single and have no younger partner to shelter assets with. If you're a single homeowner sitting between $314,000 and $695,500 in assessable assets, your main options are to use the exempt asset strategies above, or to get advice on whether a lifetime annuity makes sense. Some lifetime annuities have a portion of their value excluded from the assets test. It's worth understanding how they're treated before dismissing them. The honest truth is that every situation is different. The thresholds, the liquidity question, the gifting decisions, the exempt asset moves. None of them work in isolation. They interact, and the numbers that apply to a couple in their early 70s with $800,000 in assessable assets are completely different from the ones that apply to a single person at 67 with $380,000. If you subscribe, I'll keep walking through these specifics week by week, so you're building the full picture, not just grabbing one strategy out of context. Let me bring this together quickly. Your super affects your age pension more than most people realize. And the assets test is usually the mechanism doing the damage for homeowners with moderate balances. For every $1,000 above the threshold, your pension drops $3 per fortnight. For a couple at $600,000 in assessable assets, that's over $10,000 a year leaving your household. The younger spouse strategy can reduce that. If your partner is under 67 and their super is in accumulation, it's not counted. But moving money back to accumulation to trigger that benefit comes with a cost. Reduced access to a lump sum when you actually need it. That cost doesn't show up on a pension statement. It shows up the year your roof leaks or your hot water system gives out. If you're single, the thresholds are lower. Advice built for couples doesn't automatically transfer to your situation. You don't need to solve this all at once. Start by knowing your own asset position, where you sit relative to the threshold that applies to you. That one piece of information tells you whether there's anything to do and how urgent it is. I put these videos together because the system is genuinely complicated, and most people only find out how it works after they've already lost money to it. If that resonates, subscribe. New video every week. I'll see you in the next one.